flies in the face of what any normal mother would do.
And my 2-week-old is not in her sleeper. Her passy is on the floor. She's not in her sleeper. She's not here.
Y'all know I didn't do this.
I looked all in his clothes. I don't know where else to look.
Just because somebody has domestic abuse issues with their spouse doesn't mean that they would put their hands on their kids.
It is not possible to be a good parent while being an abusive partner. Those two things do not coexist. You cannot hit and abuse the person you claim to love while also being a gentle, caring parent to your child. Yes, it's possible that an abusive partner can be on their best behavior towards their child for years, if not over a decade. But there always comes a time in which that rage and anger is turned from their partner and onto their child. Whether it be because the child reminds them of their partner, or maybe they want to use their child as a weapon against the adult. Regardless, the abuse always comes around in one way or another, and the same goes for today's case. One man who claims he did not hurt his child while the evidence says otherwise. And all throughout his claims, he said, "I hit my spouse, but not my child." Okay, buddy, whatever you say. With that being said, let's get into today's case. Caliyah McNabb was born on September 23, 2017 in Covington, Georgia, to parents Courtney Bell and Christopher Knabb, and she had an older sister only identified as CM in court documents, who was 2 years old at the time of Caliyah's birth. Caliyah was born prematurely without complications, weighing only around 5 pounds. She spent 4 days in the hospital for routine care before being discharged home. Unfortunately, I'm not able to tell you much about Caliyah's short time on this earth. She had a very short period of time in which she was well cared for by a family member who loved her, but as soon as she was given back to her birth parents, it all went to hell. The whole family dynamic here is very, I'll say, unusual. Turns out Courtney and Christopher are first cousins, but they were also dating at the time and having kids. Also at the time, Courtney was living in a trailer rented for her by her father. A few weeks after moving into the trailer, her boyfriend Chris moved in with her. The relationship between Courtney and Chris did not seem to be a healthy one by any means. Those around Courtney say that she would often show up with bruises on her arms and legs. Around the time of Caliyah's birth, she even had a black eye. Plus, Chris was a heavy drug user. Courtney used as well, so it seems like they were both enmeshed in this toxic lifestyle of doing drugs together, and Courtney sticking with Chris despite his violence towards her. For the days following Caliyah's birth, she and her older sister, CM, were left with Courtney's cousin, Megan. Courtney basically just dropped them off along with a diaper bag, hoping that Megan could care for them for some unknown period of time. Courtney felt that her kids would be safer with Megan, away from the domestic abuse and away from the drugs. But after a few days, things got overwhelming for Megan. Having these 2 young children in the home, along with her own 4 young children, was very stressful. She could not handle it. So she contacted Courtney's father, the girl's grandfather, Tim, who came to pick them up. For the days that followed, the kids stayed with Tim, who reportedly took good care of them. He fed them, bathed them, and made sure they had everything they needed. However, once she found out that Tim had the girls, Courtney called 911 to report that her father took her kids without her permission. In response, Tim actually called 911 to report that he was taking the kids because Courtney and Chris were abandoning them, neglecting them. They were safer under his care. With this situation, it was decided that, at least for the time being, the kids should stay with Tim while things cooled down on both sides. For the days that followed, Tim told Courtney that he would return the girls to her once she got her home in order. She needed to clean the place up, do the dishes, finish the laundry. She did just that. So finally, by October 6, 2017, Tim agreed to bring the kids back to Courtney and Chris's home. He dropped Caliyah and CM off, along with some baby food and diapers. That same night, October 6th, Courtney's cousin Craig went over to their home to hang out and smoke meth with Courtney and Chris. Craig only stayed for around 15 minutes, but at the time, he saw Caliyah there looking healthy and sleeping just fine in her bassinet in the bedroom. Throughout that night, Courtney said she had been up and down with Caliyah, taking care of her anytime she woke up. By 5 a.m., now going into October 7th, Courtney finally went to sleep on the couch in the living room. She was later joined by Chris, who fell asleep on the couch with her. But by 10 a.m., Courtney woke up to her older daughter, 2-year-old CM, telling her that Caliyah was gone and crying hysterically. She got up to look for her 2-week-old baby, and sure enough, she was nowhere to be found. Immediately, Courtney went into a panic, calling her father, grandparents, her aunt, and a friend, all to ask if Caliyah was somehow with them. But she wasn't. Both Courtney and Chris were freaking out at this point, trying to figure out what possibly could have happened to their baby girl. They searched around the trailer to see if she had been moved, because CM did have a habit of picking up the baby and moving her, putting her all around the house. But after tearing the place apart, they realized that she was nowhere to be found. Finally, by 10:39 a.m., Courtney called 911 to report her daughter as missing. In the call, Courtney said that the last time she saw Caliyah was at 5 a.m. that morning when she woke up with her. She said that her 2-year-old told her that someone came in and took the baby, but she doesn't really know if she should believe her because, of course, she's 2. She said that she called her dad Tim, who was out there searching for her right now. She called her grandparents, but they also didn't have her. Her blanket was missing with her, but everything else belonging to Caliyah was still in the home.
Eaton County 911, what's the emergency?
I just woke up. My dog woke me up on the couch. I have a 2-year-old and I have a 2-week-old. And my 2-week-old is not in her sleeper. Her passie's on the floor.
She's not in her sleeper?
She's not in her sleeper. She's not here. I've looked everywhere. I've looked under clothes and everything.
What's your address, ma'am? Do you think somebody took her, ma'am?
My child said, my 2-year-old says she's gone. And I've looked everywhere in the house, so I don't know another possibility.
Okay. And you said you were asleep and woke up and she was gone?
Yes. My 2-year-old came and woke me up.
Okay.
That's how she was on the couch.
Okay.
Caliyah!
How old is she, ma'am?
2 weeks old.
Okay. And who else would have come in your house?
I mean, as far as I know, nobody would have came in my house. My 2-year-old says Papa, but I called my dad and I called my grandparents, and they don't have her.
Okay.
My dad's on the way here now.
All right. How long have you been asleep?
The last time I woke up with her was around, I guess, 5 maybe.
Okay. So you were asleep since 5 o'clock?
Yes. I didn't even mean to fall asleep on the couch. I sit down for a minute after dealing with her all night.
Entry, or can you tell if someone's been there? Is her blanket there or gone?
Her blanket's gone. Her passie's here on the floor. Her blanket's not with us. I don't know where. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's with her.
Okay.
And I have clothes in totes, but I've looked all in them, and she's not here.
Anything else missing, like a baby bag that you would have, or anything else?
No. Her bottle's here on top of my shelf.
Okay. What about
No, it's in my bathroom on my vanity. I'm sorry.
Ma'am?
Huh?
What about anything else that could possibly have gone, like could be hers that could have gone with her?
No. Nothing else. Just her and her blanket.
Okay, so the only thing that's missing is her and her blanket.
Yes.
And you didn't talk to the dad or grandma or anybody else?
Dad was here with me. Dad just left, and he's walking around the park looking for her. Because my 2-year-old says, I asked her, did somebody come in and take her? And she said, yeah, but she's 2, so I don't know if I can believe that or not.
And you looked through everything, like under the bed?
Yes, ma'am.
Bathrooms?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Caliyah!
All right, what's your name, ma'am?
Courtney Bell.
Just to let you know, Courtney, they've been on the way out there. I'm just getting this information to update them, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right, so you and the dad both were, I'm just trying to get an understanding so I can let them know because of the questions that they're asking me. You and the dad both were sleeping or he just came back home?
No, me and him woke up together. She woke us up together.
Okay. The 2-year-old woke y'all up and told y'all that the baby was gone?
Yes.
Okay.
She was kind of freaked out. I mean, I don't know. Because she was just standing there beside the couch in the corner. And I told her, come here, and I loved on her. And then I told my baby's dad to go check on Caliyah. And then he's talking about she's not in here. She's not in here.
Okay. Well, the police should be in the area now.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and let you go, okay?
Thanks.
A few minutes after the 911 call was placed, officers arrived to the home and met with Courtney. She told officers the same thing she told the dispatcher, that she last saw Caliyah at 5 a.m. that morning and she's now missing. Courtney said that she doesn't know anyone who would want to come into their home to kidnap her baby. Anyone she could think of who could have taken her, such as her father and grandparents, don't have her. During this time, officers also noted that Courtney appeared to be calm and collected one moment, then would start to become panicky when speaking about what happened to her daughter, but then would return to being calm and composed. Officers took a look inside the home and noted no signs of forced entry either at the front door nor near the window where Caliyah's bassinet was located. There was no blood or any sign of trauma within the home. Based on this, it did not seem that anyone could have broken in and taken Caliyah.
Sheriff's office.
Yes. Okay. I'll sleep right here. My husband fell asleep. Well, he's not my husband, but he's my baby's father. My husband fell asleep right there. My child, my 2-year-old was back here at the top of the bed. My baby was asleep in her sleeper. The last time I woke up with her was around 5. Her package on the floor, her and her blanket's gone. I looked everywhere. My 2-year-old came in and said she's gone.
Where was your 2-year-old sleeping?
Right there.
Right here?
Yes. I looked all in his clothes. I don't know where else to look.
And who would have possibly come and got her?
No one. I called my grandparents. I called my dad. I called anybody that would have came and got her. He went around the park to look for her. There's my cousin. I don't know where else. 20 hours?
1 month.
2 weeks old.
2 weeks.
Yes. I don't know where else to look.
Well, it's not like, couldn't have got up and walked away?
Where else to look?
I thought Amy had, the child's father not looking for the child.
Yes.
She's walking in the car.
He's walking.
Okay.
Not sorry.
Walking.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe she got. But she does pick her up and tow her places. That's
Who?
my 2-year-old.
Who does?
My 2-year-old.
When officers first arrived, Courtney told them that Caliyah's father, Chris, had gone out walking towards Highway 36 to search for her. Well, about half an hour after officers showed up, Chris was seen walking back towards the direction of the home. It was raining at the time, and by the time Chris approached officers, he was sweaty, wet, and covered in mud and green stuff. He was fidgety, acting very standoffish, and seemed extremely nervous. It looked like he had just come back from the woods.
Was the child here last night?
The child was here. I
Where
did.
were you the last 2 days? There was somebody else.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah.
No, sir. They brought her and my sister.
No, that was 21. Brother, can you handle that?
You need
I
somebody?
mean, the first thing that I heard this morning when she called her papa and told her papa about it was, where's that boy at? Where's that boy at? I'm always the first one to get blamed for everything. That's my kid. That's my child. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the child is.
I'm more worried about that baby than everybody except her.
Okay.
At the time, Chris took one of the officers back into the woods, showing him where he went to search for Caliyah, but he was giving pretty much no explanation of why he searched for her in those specific areas. Something else that was very odd was that Chris was carrying a flashlight to search for Caliyah, but it was sunny out. The sun had been out since before Caliyah was discovered missing, so it really didn't make sense for him to need a flashlight. Either way, even though this whole situation was very odd, based on Chris leading this officer into the woods, other officers started directing their searches in this area to make sure they weren't missing something. As the searches continued, both Courtney and Chris were taken into the station for further questioning. Chris told officers that he had fed Caliyah at some point between 3:30 and 5 a.m. before going back to sleep. He said that he woke up at 9:30 a.m. to a text from his father, so at the time he got up to check on the babies. They were both still in their beds, sleeping soundly. However, by 10 a.m., he was woken up again to CM crying and saying that her sister was missing. That is when he realized Caliyah was missing and when he headed straight into the woods to search for her. But again, he gave no explanation for why he immediately thought she would be in the woods. Chris mentioned that there were some people who were out to get him, some people who may have wanted to retaliate against him. Officers went out and found these individuals who said that they hung out with Chris a few weeks prior at his home. While there, Chris beat one of these men up before the man ran out of the home and escaped. After that, this man didn't want anything to do with Chris or Courtney. He never went back to the home, and he certainly didn't break in to take their baby. Based on everything Courtney and Chris said up to this point, officers did not believe that these friends wanted to retaliate against him by taking their baby, especially since they were both asleep on the couch and could have heard something. There was also no evidence of a ransom demanded or any sort of other threats. So it made no sense for random people to want to take someone's baby like that. Police were also able to rule out Courtney's father and mother and grandparents and Chris's father pretty much right away. After the initial interviews with Courtney and Chris, they were released from custody that same night. As that happened, the searches for Caliyah intensified. They brought sniffer dogs in to scour the area, but they found nothing that night. Searches continued the following morning, with more and more volunteers joining in on the efforts to find this precious 15-day-old baby girl. As the searches continued, there was one neighbor who was out searching in the woods when she noticed a log that was sitting across a large hole in the ground that looked unusual and out of place. Under that log, there was a pile of twigs and sticks, almost like they were placed there to cover something. She then noticed a black string sticking out, so she pulled on it, which revealed a blue Nike drawstring bag. Immediately, she alerted someone nearby to alert police. Officers arrived very quickly to inspect the bag. Upon initial examination, it looked like the bag was wet from the recent bout of rain, but it appeared that the bag hadn't been there for too long. Upon opening the bag, they removed several items of men's clothing, which were later determined to belong to Chris. Then, as they removed these clothing items, officers saw a little baby blanket. When they removed that blanket, they noticed the top of an infant's head. They removed the infant from the bag, and pretty quickly they determined that it was a baby girl, and she was deceased. Of course, this tiny, precious little baby was ultimately identified as being 15-day-old Caliyah McNabb. After this gruesome and heartbreaking discovery was made, news of Caliyah's death started making its way through the family. At the time of those searches, Courtney and Chris were with Courtney's mother, Pam, who is also Chris's aunt. They were all riding together in a car, headed back home to appear in front of the cameras for a media interview. While in the car, Courtney's aunt found out about them finding Caliyah's body. So she called Courtney, who shared the news with Chris and Pam. According to Pam, as soon as she heard the news, she told Chris to get out of the car and run. She was worried that people would believe that he was the one who killed Caliyah. So as soon as they got to a red light, Chris said, "They're gonna think it's me," before jumping out of the car and running. By the time Courtney and Pam returned home, Courtney spoke with police. They asked her if Chris had been missing a bag, and Courtney described a blue Nike bag which he usually used to carry clothes in. She noticed this bag had been missing for a few days. This was the exact same bag that Caliyah was found in. Courtney then told officers about how she knew Caliyah had been found and said that Chris jumped out of the car and ran. From there, the searches for Chris began, but didn't last long. By that same afternoon, there was this gas station cashier who called 911 to report that a man looking soaking wet and nasty had entered the store and said that he was running from the cops who were on his trail. This man told her that they found the body of his infant daughter, but kept exclaiming that he didn't do it. He was acting all hyped up and talking about how he just spent days in the woods. The way he was acting was making this cashier fear for her life. Pretty quickly, officers responded to the call and found Chris at the gas station located just off Highway 36. At the time, he was soaking wet with grass and leaves all over his clothes. Immediately, police apprehended him and took him back to the station. At the station, officers conducted another interview with Chris. Now, some of what I'm going to tell you comes from multiple interviews done over several months. But for the sake of efficiency and not being too redundant, I'll just put all of those statements together. In his interviews, Chris continued to deny having any involvement in his daughter's death. He initially had told officers that he only smoked weed occasionally, with the last time being 2 weeks prior. However, he later admitted that he used meth in the home daily, including on the night of Caliyah's disappearance. He blamed his meth use for her death, saying that he allowed people in his home to do drugs, people who shouldn't have been around his kids. He pointed towards some other friends and other frequent visitors of his home as being responsible for her death. But as I stated earlier, each time someone else was looked into, there was no credible evidence that could point them in any of their directions. And based on what we heard Chris say earlier, that he checked on the baby at 9:30 a.m. and she was gone by 10, that doesn't leave much time for an unknown perpetrator to enter the home, take the baby unnoticed, then beat her to death, wrap her in one of Chris's shirts, put her in his bag, and then go out to the woods to hide her, all before anybody noticed. He also admitted that he physically abused Courtney a week or two before Caliyah was born, causing that black eye and bruises we discussed earlier. When it comes to him running off after Caliyah's body was found, he said that he only did that because he got scared and felt like he was going to be accused anyways. It didn't mean he was guilty. As all this was happening with finding Caliyah's body and now with Chris running from officers, obviously the suspicion on Chris was just growing. By this point, officers started looking into Chris's phone and social media and spoke to witnesses who knew him and Courtney to get a better picture of each individual and how this could have happened. They saw that by around 5:51 a.m. on October 7th, Chris changed his profile picture on Facebook. Then detectives spoke with a friend of Chris's, Shane. He said that by 7:41 a.m. that morning, Chris texted him saying that he was wigging and tripping and needed to get out of the house. About an hour later, he texted Shane again saying that he couldn't find the baby. Once again, these messages were about an hour and a half before Courtney reports waking up and realizing her daughter was missing, which was 10 a.m. I do want to note that these messages were never corroborated. They never actually found them on either of their phones, so police basically just had to take Shane's word for it. After CM alerted Chris and Courtney to Caliyah's disappearance, a neighbor reported seeing Chris standing on the porch, repeatedly saying, "They're going to think I did this." The neighbor told Chris to calm down, but he was acting very anxious, and the neighbor just felt that something was very off. Based on how Chris had been acting, telling friends about how he was wigging out and saying that he couldn't find the baby hours before they originally said she was missing, all of that made Chris look very suspicious. As the investigation continued, of course, little Caliyah's body was sent off to the medical examiner for an autopsy, and what they found was devastating. When her body was found, she had been wrapped in a gray adult tank top. The tank top appeared to have bloodstains on it. She was then placed in the Nike drawstring bag before the baby blanket was placed on top of her. Then, as we know, more of Chris's clothes were also in the bag. There was also debris in that bag, such as leaves and grass, which were found on and around Caliyah's body. The medical examiner found several injuries to Caliyah's head and face. She had multiple bruises on her left cheek and jawline, as well as a cut just below her eye that looked to have been caused by some sort of sharp object. She had multiple skull fractures and indentation to her skull, as well as severe brain trauma. The brain injuries she suffered were closed head injuries, meaning that they wouldn't have produced any amount of blood. But she also had a severe laceration to the upper palate of her mouth, which spanned all the way from front to back. This injury was so severe that it caused her baby teeth to start protruding through her gums. That would have resulted in blood, which would explain the blood found on that tank top. The ME determined that these injuries were likely caused by a significant amount of impact to the head. They would have been caused by a series of blows with an object, or they could have been caused by a crushing injury, such as someone stomping on her head while it was placed against a hard surface. The ME discounted the possibility of a TV or other heavy object falling on her while she was in bed or something, because the soft surface of the bed would have absorbed some of the impact, causing a different pattern of injuries than what the ME found. The injury she had sustained had to have been caused while her head was against a hard surface. The medical examiner determined that Caliyah's cause of death was blunt impact injury to her head, and the manner of death is determined to be homicide. In her opinion, there was no way this death was accidental. After the discovery of Caliyah's body, and once the autopsy was conducted, investigators took Courtney into the station for questioning once again. Courtney continued to deny any involvement in her daughter's death, claiming to have no idea what happened. However, she admitted that Chris very heavily abused drugs such as meth. He used it almost daily, and there were times where he was up for 4 or 5 days at a time straight, then would crash and sleep for an entire day. He could become very paranoid and hyperactive when smoking meth, and would often say that he's wigging or tripping, which is referring to him being paranoid while on meth. And while on these drugs, any drugs, he would regularly physically abuse her. She said that she suffered bruises all over her arms and legs, and even a black eye at one point. But she maintained that Chris has never been abusive towards CW or Caliyah. He has never laid a hand on a child. She said that if she had to guess, someone came into the home and took Caliyah, probably someone who Chris had over to do drugs. Now, as I stated earlier, after Chris ran, he was apprehended and taken into the station. He was charged with Caliyah's murder at that time, and shortly after, a grand jury indicted him on charges of malice murder, felony murder, second-degree murder, aggravated battery, and concealing the death of another. While in jail, he and Courtney spoke on the phone multiple times between the months of October and December, which were recorded and listened to by police officers. These calls have been released to the public as they were played during the trial, but they are a bit hard to hear. I have listened to them, and there's a few parts that are kind of clear, so I may include some parts of the calls here, but if not, I will have the video with the calls linked below. In the calls, you hear Courtney confronting Chris, now saying that she believed he was responsible for Caliyah's death. Chris is very, very defensive, saying that he just can't believe Courtney would think he's responsible. He had no idea how this baby died. He's trying to figure it out for himself. He continued to deny knowing what happened to his daughter, trying to place the blame everywhere but himself. He said that someone came in and took the baby from them and was trying to blame him, saying that he just cannot believe that Courtney would ever think he's responsible. Courtney would later say that she truly believed that Chris was not responsible during the initial stages of the investigation, but after he jumped out of that car and after the autopsy and everything else that was coming out, she started to believe that Chris was responsible. Up until that point, the investigation was really focused on Chris's involvement with his daughter's death. However, by January of 2018, Courtney Bell was also arrested and charged with second-degree murder, second-degree cruelty to a child, and contributing to the deprivation of a minor. She, too, was indicted by a grand jury shortly after. Then, almost 3 years after little Caliyah's death, both Courtney and Chris stood trial for the murder of their 15-day-old baby. The prosecution argued that Chris hit Caliyah with a hard object so hard that it caused her skull to become seriously disfigured and damaged beyond repair. He then wrapped her up in his shirt and a blanket before tossing her in a drawstring bag and hiding her in the woods. They discussed all the evidence we've discussed up to this point. They pointed to his drug use, the fact that he had a very extensive criminal history dating back 10 plus years. There were several witnesses who could testify to his bizarre behaviors after, how he came back from the woods after police were called, only for her body to be found in the woods the following morning, wrapped in his shirt inside his drawstring bag. How he ran out of the car as soon as her body was found. He and Courtney were the only ones in the trailer when that baby went missing. There was no sign of forced entry, no motive for anyone else to come in and take their baby and beat her to death so brutally and violently. Now, in the trial, the prosecution didn't come up with a motive for this. They couldn't. However, it's possible that while on meth, Chris freaked out and beat his baby for whatever reason. Maybe she was crying too much and he was sleep deprived. Maybe he was in the middle of some sort of delusion and took it out on her. Maybe he just didn't want a second child and couldn't handle having a young baby. We truly don't know. But at the end of the day, I think the most likely situation was that he was on drugs, which caused him to become violent, and he lashed out and beat his baby girl. Then he hid her body and dumped it without a care in the world. Then, once off drugs, I think it's totally possible that he either didn't remember killing his daughter, or he's in denial and refuses to accept that he did so. Then, when it comes to Courtney's involvement, the prosecution basically argued that her doing drugs and allowing Chris to do drugs and allowing his behaviors to continue, all of that contributed to her being responsible for her baby's death. She may not have physically killed that baby, but her actions led to her murder. However, both Courtney and Chris continued to deny their involvement. Of course, Courtney's defense pointed the sole blame on Chris. She admitted that she wasn't the best mother. She did drugs. She allowed her children to be around unsavory people. She may have neglected them, and she didn't protect them as well as she should have. But she did not know that Chris was going to kill their baby. There's no way she could have predicted it, and she didn't know after the fact either, and she certainly didn't take part in it. She was asleep from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. There is some evidence that Chris was awake during that time, as we see from him changing his Facebook profile picture, and then after him allegedly texting that friend at 7:30, and then saying the baby was gone by 8:30. Again, these texts have never been confirmed, but the timeline would make sense for what Courtney was saying. Meanwhile, Chris said that he was not responsible for Caliyah's death. Someone else must have done it and was trying to blame it on him. He continued to say that he doesn't know what happened to his daughter, but he would never lay a hand on her. He is not guilty for her murder. Which, again, as I stated earlier, I think it's totally possible that he may actually believe that he didn't kill his daughter because he doesn't remember it because he was on so many drugs. But at the end of the day, all of the evidence points towards him. After hearing evidence from both sides, the prosecution and defense each made their closing arguments, and the jury was sent off for deliberations. After their deliberations, the jury came back with their decisions. They found Christopher McNabb guilty on charges of malice murder, felony murder, second-degree murder, aggravated battery, and concealing the death of another. They also decided that Courtney was guilty on her charges of second-degree murder, second-degree cruelty to children, and contributing to the deprivation of a minor. Chris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Courtney was sentenced to 30 years with the possibility of parole after 15. In his sentencing hearing, Chris had a lot to say. He continued to maintain his innocence, saying that just because he hurt Courtney, it doesn't mean he hurt his kids.
Since I'm pretty sure by the law states that I have a right to confront my witnesses who accuse me of doing wrong, so I felt like I wanted to say it in front of her since she was the one up here slandering me. And that's all I got to say.
You sure you don't want to talk about the sentencing and all of that? That was the only thing you wanted to tell the court?
I mean, I haven't heard anything about a sentence. I was just commenting on that. I understand
for the charges. And I just wanted to know if you had anything you wanted to say to the court.
I mean, I got a lot to say. I got a lot to say, but I'm not going to be able to say half of it.
I don't know, because I don't know what you're going to say.
I'm innocent. I didn't do it.
Okay.
I've maintained that the whole time. I feel like there was things that were allowed to be said that should have never been allowed to be said. That didn't have nothing whatsoever to do with the case and what was being said. Just because somebody has domestic abuse issues with their spouse doesn't mean that they would put their hands on their kids which has also been pretty much proved that I've never touched my kids in any harmful manner whatsoever. I've never harmed my kids. I didn't even hear anything that said that I had done anything to her in front of the kids. So that doesn't make sense either. And, you know, just to let the record show that I don't think I ever put my hands on her in front of those kids. And I just don't feel like just because somebody has domestic issues with the female in their life that they love, that they were just able to just say, oh, he don't love you and all that stuff just in front of everybody or whatever, which doesn't matter. But I just don't understand how you find somebody guilty of doing something to a 15-day-old baby because there was no evidence whatsoever that proved anything about me putting my hands on my kids. I've never done it. I never would. I don't believe in it. I was beat as a child, and I don't agree with it at all. And I would never do it. I would never do this. That's all I got to say. I would never do it. I'm innocent.
Well, I can make a lot of comments on what you said. I can make a lot of comments on the trial, but I know that was just be arguing with you or talking with you. I'll ask you one simple question. You claim you're innocent, so you tell me what sentence the man or woman that you claim did this should receive.
If you ever find out who did them, they deserve to be under the jail.
Okay. So they ought to get the maximum sentence.
Most definitely.
Okay. On the crime of malice murder, I sentence you to life in confinement without parole. On concealing the death of another, I sentence you to 10 years in confinement, consecutive or after. Count one. Do you understand each of your sentences?
Yes, sir.
Courtney also had a lot to say. In a very emotional statement, she continued to maintain that she too was innocent.
Does your client wish to make any statements?
I didn't do this.
Stand up.
Y'all know I didn't do this.
Miss Bell, you and I had a conversation back in Chambers on Wednesday, remember, morning? And at the time I told you there's a difference between the reality of the situation and what you think. I explained to you exactly why you were being charged with the crimes. It wasn't that you knew about the murder, it wasn't that you anticipated the murder, it wasn't that you planned the murder, any of those things. It was simply that you created an environment that caused your children to be put second and Mr. McNabb to be put first. As the state said in their closing, and they used the example of a rattlesnake being thrown into a room and the child being put into there. Well, your whole claim is I took him back because I wanted to have a family. In that analogy the state used, it's just kind of like saying your child's dead from a rattlesnake bite. Why would you put it in there? And you responded, well, I just wanted her to enjoy nature, have an appreciation of the outdoors, without appreciating the danger. Now, I'm sorry, but for you to go around chasing McNabb, doing meth, flies in the face of what any normal mother would do. We hear stories out in society, I mean out everywhere. The mother bear, they're so ferocious. Why? Because you're messing with their child. All those kind of things. And you chose methamphetamine and McNabb over a baby.
It's a sickness, but I tried to be a good mama. I love my babies.
The problem, Miss McNabb, is that, like most criminals, you have this version of what a good mama is that is so far from the norm that, you know, you go anywhere in this county, talk to anybody who's watching this and say, is it a good mama who doesn't even care about her 14-year-old baby? Put them with a cousin. I've known of instances where mamas won't even let in the first couple of weeks of a child's life people around the child for fear that the child's immune system hadn't been built up and they don't want germs brought into the child. They go to that extent. You went just the exact opposite direction. And there's just no excuse for that. On count one, I'm going to sentence you with 30 years, with the first 15 years to be served in confinement in the state penitentiary, the remaining time on probation. On count three, I'm going to sentence you to 10 years in confinement and run at the same time as count one. Now, do you understand your two sentences? And let the record reflect she's nodding her head slightly yes.
After their convictions, both Courtney and Chris have submitted appeals, both saying that there was insufficient evidence to support their convictions. At this time, Chris's appeal has been denied. However, by October of 2023, Courtney's convictions of second-degree murder and cruelty to a child were overturned, while the charge of contributing to the deprivation of a minor stood. The Georgia Supreme Court determined that there was not enough evidence to convict her of murder. In their ruling, the judge stated, quote, "The evidence here showed that Belle went to sleep one night, checked on Caliyah early the next morning, and went back to sleep for 4.5 hours. The evidence further showed that while Belle slept, McNabb committed a violent crime that the state conceded was the direct and immediate cause of Caliyah's death. There was no evidence that Caliyah's death was a reasonably foreseeable consequence of Belle's drug use, or drug use in the home by McNabb or others, or that it was reasonably foreseeable that McNabb would commit the horrific crimes that resulted in Caliyah's death. And there was no evidence presented that showed Belle was a party to McNabb's crimes, that she heard McNabb striking Caliyah and did nothing to stop him, or that she refused to provide Caliyah with potentially life-saving medical treatment." After being exonerated from these charges, Courtney has since been released from jail after serving the sentence for contributing to the deprivation of a child. And as of right now, that is where the case sits. So that is all of the information I have for you all on today's case. Obviously, regardless of what happened, this is such a devastating case. Caliyah deserved so much better, and she had people in her life who truly cared for her. I do believe that Chris is the main perpetrator in her death. I think he killed Caliyah while Courtney was asleep. I think the evidence does show that. However, obviously I do think she bears some blame in allowing it to happen through her own drug use, through allowing Chris's drug use, and by not allowing her father, Tim, to watch her kids, knowing that Chris is a dangerous person. I'm so sick of this whole sentiment of, well, I hit my wife, girlfriend, spouse, but I would never hurt my child. I think it's a lame excuse, and it's 100% untrue. Anyone who is willing to lay a hand on their partner, anyone who is capable of acting violent towards their partner, is also capable of hurting their child. Oh, I never hit her in front of the kids. So, you are still hurting your kids by hurting their mother. And again, as I've said in past videos, these violent offenders can act on their best behavior for years. Although, anytime a mother or father is being abused, regardless of if it's in front of the kids or not, that is going to indirectly hurt the children. But even beyond that, some abusive parents will go many years without touching their child, all while abusing their spouse. But there always comes a time where that violence starts being put onto the child as well. If someone is hitting a woman, their partner, whatever, they will eventually hurt their child as well. It's not possible to be an abusive partner and still a good parent. It simply isn't. I'm very happy that Chris is stuck behind bars for life after what he did to his precious baby. He deserves nothing but the worst for how he's treated those around him and how he brutally murdered an innocent, defenseless infant. And for Courtney, I certainly hope she learned her lesson for who she allows into her life. I hope this whole thing served as a lesson to make better choices, because at the end of the day, she does bear some responsibility for this, and I hope she knows that, regardless of if she ever put a hand on this baby. But that is where I'm going to end today's video, and now I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think Chris murdered his baby, or do you think it was an intruder? If you think it was Chris, why? Do you think Courtney had anything to do with it? Do you agree with her convictions being overturned, or should she still be behind bars? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you like this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn the notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure to follow my Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.